I'm Brad Riddell. This is Corey May.
Hello.
It's interesting to see video games as cinema for the first time. I've never really watched a game that I wasn't playing, so it was interesting to watch that.
I'm just sorry we didn't have more clips of the actual narrative in the game. I hadn't looked at it first, so I apologize if you guys only got to watch a bunch of hatchet chopping. I promise there's more to games than the combat and the violence.
I'm sure you, I guess, then watch a lot of, cinematics in terms of because you work on the narratives, so do you direct those scenes as well?
No, so I write. We have a director who works with the actors. I'm often at the recording sessions, though, just to make sure that intent is being followed. I try not to backseat direct. It's not my job. My job is to write. I just want to make sure that characterizations are consistent, that the mood and feel of a scene is coming out properly. Fortunately, I work with people that are extremely talented, so I don't have to do much other than just smile and nod.
Well, this might seem like a silly question, but even the dialogue, the guy who's selling vegetables, I mean, is that the stuff that you write into a script, or how does this appear?
There are lots of different forms of narrative content that are in games, or at least in the Assassin's Creed games, and I don't do all of it myself. So I lead a team that's anywhere from 3 to 5 people. For example, on Assassin's Creed, well, it's interesting. On Assassin's Creed 1, there were only 2 of us. There was me writing the main path, and then a guy who was doing all of the background stuff, what we call, AI lines or NPC voices. And then for Assassin's Creed 2, we probably got closer to 4 or 5 people, and then Assassin's Creed 3 it was again 4 to 5 people. So I wrote the main path. A guy named Matt Turner did all of the side content. There was a woman named Carrie Young who, in conjunction with a comedian named Danny Wallace, did all of the Animus database entries, all of the text that you see in the game. And then there's a guy, Nicholas Grimwood, who does all of, like I was saying, the NPC reactions. So any of the background characters that are talking as you move through the game, that are reacting when you interact with them, those are all generated by a separate guy. And then everything looks different. So the stuff that I write and the side mission stuff looks and feels and reads like a film or television script. The background chatter, it's usually in something that looks like an Excel spreadsheet. We have proprietary software that we use at the studio, so it's a little bit more complex, but in the interest of being simple, our stuff looks like a script and the background stuff is kept in a glorified Excel spreadsheet.
Okay. Well, we started off with technical stuff because I was sort of interested in seeing the game played that way. But give us a quick bio. You grew up, I found out last night, in Boston for like a month.
Yes. I lived in Boston until I was a couple months old, and then my parents immediately got on a plane and moved to Los Angeles. And so I was born and raised in LA, spent my formative years there. Went to college back east at Harvard for 4 years. Didn't know what I majored in economics. I had spent my summers working at investment banks and did not enjoy it. So I was approaching my senior year of college and had no idea what I was going to do with my life. I found out about a grad program at USC that ostensibly taught people how to be film producers. So I decided it was 2 more years of not having to worry about getting a job. So I applied, got in, and went there. It turned out to be extremely fortunate. I met my business partner there. I met Sarah, who we also work with now, our president of production there. And upon graduating, a lot of our friends started taking jobs in the industry as assistants, or as CEs at studios. And we figured we'd just gone to school to become producers. Goddamn, we were going to be producers. So we printed up business cards and letterhead and decided we were producers and went around sort of developing different ideas, meeting with writers in town, and got very lucky. In about 6 months after graduating, sold a movie to Disney for quite a bit of money, which let us keep the company running for a while. And it then also, I guess, allowed agents and execs to take us a little bit more seriously. So we started setting up more and more stuff. We signed with an agency that at the time was called William Morris. It's now William Morris Endeavor. And we were doing this for a few years. We were setting up lots of stuff. We were getting nothing made. You can't live off of development fees. I mean, I guess you can, but not when you're also trying to run a business. And we were getting nervous. We were trying to figure out what we were going to do. My partner was constantly saying, we just need to get one of these things into production. Like, you can wave a magic wand and suddenly a movie gets made. Doesn't quite work that way. Around the same time, William Morris, our agency, was receiving open writing assignments from video game publishers and developers saying, we're looking for quote-unquote Hollywood talent to write the stories in our games. And the money wasn't very good, so everyone was passing. And a lot of people, I think, at the time, and still do, unfortunately, consider video games to be a sort of bastard narrative medium. It is, the playground of dummies and hacks. And, people that can't make it in the real world of film and television. And a lot of people just don't care about games. I love games. My business partner loves games. We turned around and said, well, if none of the other clients are going to take these jobs, we will. We don't care that they're not paying a lot of money. We'll pay money. Like, we just want to get involved in making games. Like, we love games, and this is a fun thing to do. So we started doing it, did a couple of smaller games that were not so fantastic, but it was a great experience. And then a couple years after that, met with some people from Ubisoft who we wanted to turn one of their properties into a Saturday morning cartoon. We weren't even talking about writing games for them, and they said, no, this is dumb, you don't want to do this, or you can't do this, but come up to our facility in Montreal and sort of meet the people there, see what it is we're doing, and let's just see if something happens. So it was this sort of abstract and unformed, and we flew up for a couple of days, and one thing led to another, and we've been working with them for pretty much 10 years. Worked on a bunch of Prince of Persia games. The original Prince of Persia team sort of segued into creating Assassin's Creed, so we moved along with them, and we were there from pretty much day zero, and have been working on it pretty much ever since.
Well, so you got involved, I guess, at the time when, I mean, I guess the question is, writing games, when did games start to be written? Because, I grew up like you did, playing games that didn't have much of a narrative at all. So when did you put a pin in the timeline? And
so
say,
it's hard, because when you ask me, I say it's been since pretty much day one. That games have, from pretty much the beginning, had a narrative, whether it is a narrative in the traditional sense, right, that we're used to from film, television, books. Maybe not, right? There was, at least in the beginning, the narrative of the player. You would become frustrated when you couldn't get past the level. You would be elated when you finally figured it out. So games have been evoking emotions in players since day one. We started, I think, to see more and more traditional narrative structures as early as the early 80s. There was a company called, and even before Sierra was doing it. So Sierra was doing it with graphical adventures, King's Quest, Space Quest, Leisure Suit Larry, which a lot of people know. But even before, there was a company called Infocom, and they were doing text adventures. So whether it was Zork or Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, or Leather Goddesses of Phobos, which was sort of a adults-only version of a text adventure. These were a weird experiment. It was a combination between reading a book. It was a digital choose-your-own adventure, essentially. And then those slowly progressed into the point-and-click adventures that Sierra Online was made famous for doing. But at the same time, we had companies like Origin building entire worlds with the Ultima games and all of the other various, Bard's Tale from another company, Might and Magic. So as far back as the early 80s, there was a concerted effort to create worlds and tell stories within those worlds. It's only in the past, I would say, maybe 10 years that technology has caught up to where it is more accessible to a wider audience. So now you're starting to see things in fully realized, what we call three-dimensional space. It's not 3D in the sense that I think most people are used to, but when there's depth to it and you're moving around through it, we consider it 3D. And so then you started to see things that were perhaps closer to traditional storytelling in terms of cutscenes and that sort of stuff. But since we are such an interactive medium, we have to start trying to move beyond that and find ways to have our narrative evoke a lot of the same things that traditional passive media does, but also allow the player to maintain control and continue to exert influence over the events. And so it's still developing, it's still growing, it's still changing. We are still at the beginning. So
I guess now it's different, though. Are there lots of open writing assignments in video games, or are people? These are, I assume now, highly sought after positions.
As the business matures, you are starting to see people in the field that specialize in writing. So for a very long time, the people that were designing the games were also writing the games. And in some cases, this turned out fantastic. There's a guy, Richard Garriott, who many years ago started the Ultima series of games. And as that franchise matured, he actually was able to do some very interesting things with storytelling. He moved away from the idea of good versus evil and started playing with morality and choice in games and making players make difficult decisions that didn't have binary good and bad outcomes. Sometimes you wouldn't see what was coming until hours later. But as the business has matured, we've started to see specialization. There are still some people that wear both hats. So there's a game that just recently came out that's being celebrated for its strong narrative called Bioshock Infinite. Right. And in that case, Ken Levine is not just the writer, right? He is the creative director and in many ways the the chief designer, so he wears many, many hats, and it allows for a purity of vision, right? That it's not dispersed over multiple departments and multiple people. He's able to touch lots of different parts of the game. But other times you'll see games with much larger teams, and so they do have their own writing departments. I think a good example are the people at BioWare who do the Mass Effect and Dragon Age games. They have large teams of writers that look not unlike a TV series writing department, right? They have a writing room. The different people have different assignments, whether it's based on certain missions or certain characters, and so they all specialize in writing, in creating characters, and that's what they do. So I think that as we move forward, we'll see more and more, job differentiation, and we will start to see more and more people coming up, being trained as video game writers to be video game writers. It'll also start to happen as people stop seeing video games as a stepping stone towards other media and seeing it as a destination. I get asked a lot what it is that I eventually want to do, and people look at me like I'm crazy when I say I am doing what I want to do. This is the job I want. I am not secretly working on a film script when I'm at home or trying to write a novel. There are a lot of people that are doing that, sometimes just because writers can't keep everything inside. They got to get it all out there, and so a book may allow them to do stuff on their own time at home. But, for me, this is a full-time job. It's 7 days a week. It's 24 hours a day. If I'm not at my desk, I'm at home or in the shower, in bed, thinking about stuff and playing with lines of dialogue. And so I'm doing what I want to do, and I hope I get to do it, for the rest of my life.
Well, tell us a little bit about the setup and the structure at Ubi or at any sort of studio, which is a little different than, well, we talked about how it's a little bit similar to the old Hollywood studio days, and it's different than a lot of television and film is now. So how are you structured?
Things are not traditionally done, at least, video games are big and complex, and there's lots and lots of different ways that games are financed, produced, and distributed. But I've worked primarily in what we call first-party production. So the publisher, which is sort of like the film studio, is also the production company. So we do everything inside, at least for Assassin's Creed. Everything at Ubisoft, we're all employees, essentially. So you're not released after a game ships. You'll move on to another project. It is not, these are employees, they're not contractors. There's 2,500 people in Montreal, for example. And so it looks and feels a little bit like the old school version of the studio, where everyone is essentially an employee and everyone is working for the studio. And the nice thing is that there's a lot of job stability there, right? Most of the people that I've been working with have been there for 8, 9, 10 years, and they have great benefits and they have great retirement plan and, all of that wonderful stuff. We are starting to see in the middle ground with third-party production where developers, that are outside of a publisher will sign deals with publishers. They will then release their game, and then you'll often see a lot of people laid off as they go off to look for the next third-party place to work. So we're sort of in this transitionary period where we have the large publishers that are operating along sort of one track, and we have third-party developers that are operating along another track, and then we're back to the days of garage development with the iPad and mobile devices and online stuff, where there are 2 or 3 guys in a garage somewhere that 2 weeks after putting their app out there and now have 80 employees and are making $3 million a day. So it's a big, complex industry that does not have the rules or structure in place that I think a lot of other traditional media does. We are a relatively young business, even if at this point we're now approaching almost 30 years of video game production. So we're still figuring it all out, and I think because we seem to change as technology changes, we're going to continue to see this sort of instability and this fluidity and this dynamic nature of the business. I don't know that it'll ever settle. We're also one of the only businesses, I think, where the medium keeps changing, or at least the hardware keeps changing. Consoles go obsolete, and then all of a sudden you don't have access to the old games, or someone can't go out and buy something that was on the Coleco and play it on their 360. And we also have a really fragmented technology base. There was a brief war between HD, DVD, and Blu-ray, but it got settled and everyone figured it out and everyone started using Blu-ray. Every day we have a new box. So what plays in my 360 won't necessarily play on my PS3 unless someone ports it, right? Or on my PC. And now we've got a million new consoles that are coming out. Steam is working on a box. There's this thing called the Ouya. There's something called the Oculus Rift. And so that causes fragmentation too. So it's new opportunities for people to create content, but it also divides up the audience. So whereas you might have someone being able to go out there and everyone buys the same Blu-ray essentially, someone that picks up a 360 game can't play it unless they own a 360, and so all of a sudden your market has shrunk a little bit. So I guess that's a really long and roundabout way of saying we're still figuring it out, and I don't expect us to have answers anytime soon. It's getting crazier and crazier.
So where are you now in the Ubi structure, and where did you start, and where have you ended up at this point?
So when I first started working there, I was a writer, and so I would come in and I would spend my days meeting with the team, and then my nights and weekends writing. Most writing didn't happen during the day because what's on the page is constantly changing as the game is developed, and because there is so much player interaction with the content that I'm creating, is my days are spent talking with the designers, the mission designers, the level designers, whatever you want to call them. And as they iterate on their work, I have to iterate on my work. So it's not a matter of writing a script, turning the script in, and moving on to the next job. It's I write a script, it goes into the machine, we start to meet and talk about how it's going to be implemented and how the player's interaction with the narrative is going to affect the rest of the game, and then I'll usually have to go back and make revisions, and sometimes we're cutting content or creating new content pretty much right up until about, I want to say 2 or 3 months before release. So I can be writing for 80% of the production cycle, and a video game can take anywhere from 2 to 4 years to write, and at least in the case of Assassin's Creed 1, I was writing almost nonstop for nearly 4 years, every day, and that's kind of nuts.
But you just took a new position.
Yes, so I had been writing for almost 8, 9 years there, and I needed a break because, again, you're doing it right up until ship, and then you move right on to the sequel, or at least onto another game. So whether it was going from Prince of Persia to Assassin's Creed, or AC1 to AC2 to Brotherhood to then AC3, I needed a break. My brain was melting. So I said to them, you have to find something else for me to do or I'm going to quit, because I need a break, I need a break, I need a break. And so now, in October, I took a job inside the studio as the director of the scriptwriters at the Montreal studio. So I now oversee and advocate for all the studio writers, and I'm there to help them, not to tell them how to do their jobs, but to advocate for them, to provide resources for them, to help better organize them, give them the tools that they need to do their jobs. And I draw on the experiences that I had as a writer in the studio, all the things that I would have liked. I'm now going to try and give these things to them to enable them and to advocate for them within the studio. And so that's one half of the job, and then the other half is a little bit like a studio executive, in that I get their scripts, I provide feedback. Unlike studio notes, they are completely optional. Again, I know what it's like to be a writer in the system. I'm there to give them my advice, my ideas, my feedback, and it's theirs to do with as they please. I don't want to come in there and be a dictator. And then I'll also play through builds of the game as they come together to make sure that the integration of the narrative is making sense, and then to also just help them if there are any issues. If for some reason people on the team aren't listening to the writer, or they're threatening to cut something that is actually narratively very important and not just something that the writer's being precious about, I'll be able to go to bat for them. So lots of different things I do now. And so I thought that it would be sort of a vacation, that I'd be going upstairs and being an executive that can do the 9-to-5 thing, and no. But I think that's more me than anything else. If there's an opportunity, we ask a lot of our customers, right? We ask people to spend $60 on something. I want to make sure that we're doing the absolute best that we can, and that we're earning the customer's trust and their money. And so I still go in on weekends, and I still stay at night, not because they make me, but because I love it so much. And I want the people that play our games and buy our games to enjoy them. And
so what is the, I have to admit, I'm playing Creed 3 at the moment. Doing all right. But it's my first time in the Assassin's Creed world, coming out of, as we talked about, I play a lot of Halo and Skyrim and different games. What's the official full play time of Assassin's Creed, if you do everything you can possibly do? I
don't know. I mean, that's a really hard question to answer, because it's as long as you want it to be.
Right.
The main path is probably somewhere between 15 to 20 hours, but then there's at least another 20 hours of side content, and then if you just want to play with the systems, you can do it forever. Right. So there's no easy answer, right? It's like Skyrim. The main path in Skyrim, if you don't want to bother with anything else in the world, is probably not very long. You can probably blow through it, I don't know, 6 to 8 hours. I sunk 120 hours into that game, and I'm still finding new stuff and still doing new stuff in it. So those numbers are becoming harder and harder to pin down, because it's different for everyone.
Well, that strikes me as interesting. I mean, as traditional media screenwriters, or passive media screenwriters, I control 90 minutes for a screenplay, more or less. Or, television generates a lot of content continually, but they're in compact, one-off chunks or packets. When you open up a video game, for $60, you're getting 20, 30, 40 hours.
Yeah, I mean,
or more.
Yeah, there's a whole spectrum. Some games are more focused, more linear, and so it's maybe 8 to 10 hours.
Right.
But that's still a lot longer than most films, at least. And I think if you parse out the math, right? Let's say most people these days are, what is it, $14 to go see a movie.
Right.
So that's an hour and a half, and you start to multiply it. I still think that games are, a bigger bang for your buck. Yeah. And then if it's something multiplayer, like I play this game called League of Legends, I don't even want to know how many hours I've logged on that. A typical match is anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes, and I think the last time I checked, I'd played over 2,000 matches. So I don't even want to try and crunch those numbers. I'll cry. And that's a game that's ostensibly free. You don't even have to pay for it. There's stuff you can buy if you want to, and that's hours and hours and hours and hours of content.
Well, so with Creed 3, the research, and I mean, I have to admit, before we knew you were coming here, and the reason I even got the game was my interest in the American Revolution and the idea, as sort of a history buff and having to always wanted to live in that period. If I could go back in time, that's probably where I would go. I mean, that's a great appeal. And do you feel like opening up that narrative obviously creates a lot of work for you, because it opens with this very interesting tag about inclusion of many people of different religious beliefs and faiths and creeds developing the game. So why was that important to note? And then tell me about the research process for you as a writer. Just how am I going to control 20 some odd hours of story about this piece of history that everyone, for the most part, knows the key elements of?
So it's, I guess, two different questions. The disclaimer is just sort of a thing from the very beginning. We wanted to make sure people understood we weren't creating games with an agenda. Our goal has always been to excite and inspire people, and ideally not to create some sort of propaganda. So that was just our way of making it clear that there was no conscious agenda, at least in terms of pushing a position or point of view. And we've always tried to at least balance the points of view in the games to show as many sides of a story as possible, and to push the idea that it is our hope that individuals will take the information that they're given and draw their own conclusions rather than blindly follow. And that's always been a big part of just the Assassin's Creed in general, right? That whole tag of nothing is true, everything is permitted, is this idea of, be skeptical, question stuff, always be processing information, don't trust necessarily what authority figures tell you, and, think for yourself. And then in terms of the historical angle, we spend anywhere from 12 to 15 months, or at least I do, just doing research before I really start writing. And it's not enough, right? There are people that have spent entire academic careers focused on very small sections that we cover in our games. So I try and at least develop a baseline and a basic understanding, and then we reach out and try and work with historical consultants, and we do on every game, because I'll never pretend to be an expert, and I'm not going to try and be an expert. So we work with experts, and I'll write, they'll review, we'll then discuss places where it diverges from the historical record, and then revise accordingly when it makes sense, or find gray areas to play with where we can sort of step back and say, well, there's no real way to ensure that X, Y, or Z didn't happen. Sometimes we'll make decisions based on pacing or fun factor or technology limits, and that's where we'll diverge even more from history. So there's a constant sort of back and forth and collaboration and compromise that goes on in trying to balance historical accuracy against pure entertainment value. And again, we don't pretend to be a documentary or a replacement for history books. We are out there to get people excited about history and then encourage them to go out and actually learn about it should they choose to do so. I get upset when I see people say everything I learned about the American Revolution or the Renaissance I learned from playing Assassin's Creed games, and it's cute and funny at first, and then I get a little bit scared, and so we can laugh about it, but please, if you're listening at home, these are not history books like by any stretch of the imagination. We don't pretend that they are, or at least I don't. I don't think anyone does.
Was that part of the marketing hook for originally when there was a transition from Prince of Persia to Assassin's Creed, that that you talked about, the team moved off to a new project.
It was just the idea of playing in spaces that are not traditionally explored in video games. And we thought that there was something very interesting also of playing with periods of time and locations that are in the real world, right? That the more we could surround the player with stuff that is out there or was out there that did happen, the more immersed they would become, because now we're not transporting you to a fantasy land, right, or to 2,000 years into the future. We're transporting you back into the past, but on this planet, you know, surrounded by people that really did live and act during those times. So this idea of historical tourism, this is the closest thing you'll get for now to a time machine, to be able to interact in three-dimensional space with the past, I think was part of the appeal, and to specifically visit periods of time that aren't normally touched in at least action-adventure games. You know, there's been plenty of games, real-time strategy games, where you know, move armies around a map that may touch on historical time periods, but very few where you actually drop someone into it and say, run around and explore it and interact with it the way that we have. And I think that element of historical tourism, and a lot of times, you know, one of the taglines that marketing is used is that history is our playground. This idea of being able to go back in time and play with the space has been attractive to a lot of people.
Yeah, and I never thought I would, if you'd asked me before I started playing this game, I never would have thought that I would enjoy a fight scene where I had to take 30, 40 seconds to reload a musket, but it creates a tactic, it creates a strategy, it creates a problem-solving process for the game player
and that's also how guns worked back then.
Yeah, and that's how guns worked back then. So it's a unique approach that I like a lot. So what would you, I guess at this point, you know, here at DePaul we have a game design program. I know that you have a background, we went to the same school, but you in the producing program. What would you say for people who want to emerge into this business, break into this business? What do they need to be doing now if they're undergrads or graduate students? What do they need to have or know?
So this is the tricky thing again, right? Because the business is, if not new anymore, still so disorganized. And it's nice to start to see the creation and promotion of programs. I know that it's appreciated on the studio side because we know that people are getting actual training and exposure in this day and age, which is really nice. So they're not coming in just, you know, random people off the street that happen to love games. And so it's hard. I mean, I don't know. I think that an undergrad degree in writing, or with it, you know, a master's degree with a focus on creative writing is definitely helpful. I think the most important thing, though, is that you actually love and play and want to make games. Again, we have this problem sometimes of people saying, well, this is a stepping stone on the way to my screenwriting career. Like, please don't do that. It's not fair to you, it's not fair to us, and it's not fair to the players. So you have to love games. I think that's the first and most important thing, is to love them and be passionate about them. And then I think these programs are increasingly helpful because they show, at the very least, it's like any, you know, form of higher education in my mind, it shows a commitment to something, it shows the development of a type of work ethic, it shows that you have, you know, spent the time to think rationally about the way that games are made, and that's been really nice to see in a lot of the programs. Students are asked to actually engage in production of some sort, even if they're smaller. It gives you some amount of practical experience. It helps move you away from, you know, this idealistic vision of what it is to make a game, to recognize that this shit is really, really hard and things rarely go the way you were hoping to. And it teaches collaboration, which is probably the most important thing, right? We're talking about teams of anywhere from 60 to 80 to 300 people. And it's not like a film in the sense that everyone is necessarily following one person's orders, right? Everyone is in there working together, collaborating. It's why we don't see, I think, as many brand names or superstars. Obviously there's a couple in the video game business, but games are made by teams of people, and it is rarely just one person that you know, makes or breaks a game. And that's something that I think a lot of people often don't realize either, is that it like I said, it can be anywhere from 80 to 300 people that are all working in unison and collaborating to bring these things to life.
Were you ever into table games, board games? And does that sort of strategy you're thinking ever influence how you think about a scene or a level? Or anything?
I know that a lot of our game designers play board games, like a lot. They'll sometimes even prototype by building board games or building analog versions of some of the stuff that they're designing. For me, not as much. When I did play board games as a kid, I was much more into the ones that were super dynamic. So whether it was like Mousetrap, or I had this one that had a volcano that shot out marbles, I needed I needed stuff going on the board. Like I don't understand people that can sit down and play like Risk or Catan because the board is flat and there's just tiny. No, so
Right.
for me, no. Some things I'll play though. I don't know. It depends. I like having more stuff. I have a problem going to watch plays and musicals for that reason. There's not enough going on.
Well, you don't have a hand in it.
Yeah, well, and I need
know.
I need to see lots of stuff going on the stage. Like I get more excited when I go to the really overproduced Broadway musicals because at least you've got like these massive sets and sometimes they move, and on some of them I remember Starlight Express there were people that were like literally rollerblading out into the audience. So that kind of stuff I just need crap in front of me. I don't know why. But I love books, and there's nothing there except what's on the page. So you can't really draw any conclusions except maybe I'm insane. I don't know.
We're gonna take questions here in just a few minutes. So if you have one for Corey, I think there's a microphone over on this side. You can start migrating over there, and we'll be able to get to your questions. So do you have? You mentioned sometimes everyone has an idea. So you have a hard time reading books now, right? You said because.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be very careful. I try to stay away from any kind of period fiction these days, just because I don't want to be unduly influenced. And it's a shame because I feel like I'm missing out on a lot of stuff, but I'm neurotic to begin with, and so this is just an additional manifestation, I guess, of my neuroses. On the plus side, especially as we've moved the games closer and closer to the present, we have access to more and more first-person sources, so at least on AC3, being able to read wartime journals from the American Revolution or people's diaries or letters that they were writing to back home were really interesting and really engaging, and a lot of them told, very interesting stories about what it was like to be alive back then, just trying to survive as a, everyday person caught up in, this extremely transformative event. Okay. So they can still be just as interesting, if not more so, again, because they're rooted in reality. This was written by someone that actually lived and experienced the events rather than someone, interpreting what it might have been like. And so that's always really interesting to me.
To the player.
As much as possible.
You mentioned perceptions about the employees, the creatives in the business. Do you still feel like game designers, game players, game people are thought of as slacker or ne'er-do-wells who are spending all their time in the basement? Is that a perception that you feel still exists, given the financial success of these things?
I think definitely to a degree, right? Whenever the government decides to get angry about stuff, they come after us now. They don't, it's very muted when they're talking about books or films or television. Now we're the go-to people to harass. I still feel like everyone sees us as sort of the new kid on the block that can be pushed around, and they don't take us seriously. A lot of times our games make a lot more money than movies do, but you don't see us trumpeting it in the trades, and even if we did, no one seems to care. And so I do feel like we're still not taken very seriously by large segments of the population, and I think it's a shame. But I can't spend my days like worrying about that. I think too many people are looking for validation, and I've got better things to do. I want to focus on the people that do appreciate what we do and sort of work for them, and other people can spin their wheels trying to figure out how to convince other people to like them. But for me, it's about the fans, and so that's what I try and focus on.
So for a slacker ne'er-do-well who needs to get a job, tell everybody how many hours you work a week.
It depends. So my thing is not normal. There are plenty of people where I work, they work 9 to 5, and they get all their work done, and they're fantastic people, and there's no problems with that. But I can't help myself, so I'm still pretty much doing 7 days a week. If I can take a Saturday off here or there, I'm extremely happy, but I also feel extremely guilty. And I try and at least be done with my work by, 7 or 8, but then it's off to go home and then play games. So I try and play every night, and then I watch TV. I'm constantly trying to consume as much media as possible. I think that's really important, right? They say that if you're a writer, you should be writing all the time, but I also think you should be consuming as much media as possible all the time also. So I read books, I watch television, I watch movies, I play games, and I try now and do them at the same time. I was telling Brad that what I'll often do is I'll find a game that doesn't require 100% of my attention, and then I'll also find a television series that doesn't require 100% of my attention. And so I'll be playing a game and I'll be going through a TV series on my iPad. That's how I watched House of Cards. I had it basically streaming as I was playing through a game called Dragon's Dogma at one point. So I try and consume as much as possible, as quickly as possible.
So you're looking at 20-hour days, 19-hour days sometimes?
It depends, yeah, sometimes. But again, it's by choice. No one's making me do it. I'm doing it to myself. So do not consider me the normal version of this.
But it's like anything. It's
but again,
like
if you love what you do, right,
right.
you're going to want to be doing it as much as possible.
And it's like television or film or any endeavor that I mean, you have to be willing to put in a great deal of work and sacrifice to succeed in this business, just like anything else. It doesn't because you love a game doesn't mean you're going to be a great game designer or a great game writer.
No, but it definitely helps.
Yeah. Cool.
And you just have to decide, right? Some people have kids, I have the games, so those are my children. That's just that's what I've chosen to do.
I always have to hit pause when the kids come in the stairs. You don't want to see this. All right, so I thought we could take some questions now from the audience for Corey about the game world. He also, we didn't get to this, but Corey is actively producing television and film. He's got his, as Kristen mentioned, his hand in a lot of hats. So
it's just hard because this takes up so much of my time. So there's other people at the company that
he does have a company, Secret Agent, right? So, questions?
Yeah, I found this very inspiring and informative. Now, I'm not a gamer, but I have a son is, and he wants to write games, and he's, you know, it's his passion, and he's you know, compelled to do this. But I don't understand when you say that games are narrative, because I sit and I play a little bit with them and I go, I mean, are you talking from start to finish? There's an actual story arc and going through the different levels? I have a two-part question, so. And then would you enumerate, please, the process from like development through the writing, through the production, through the hiring of talent, or you know, whatever, if you're.
Sure. So as far as your first question, there are as many different approaches to narrative as there are games, right? So some games are very heavy with their narrative. They have, you know, very well developed narratives. They have tons and tons of scenes and, you know, moments of interaction. There are other games where there's almost no narrative. It's all about just dropping you in and enjoying the gameplay. So it's different. There's lots of different games that cater to different audiences and put different emphasis on different aspects, whether it's full focus on gameplay, full focus on narrative, or a mix of both. I think that as the industry continues to move forward, we'll start to see, I hope, a blurring of the lines between, you know, cutscene gameplay, cutscene gameplay, cutscene gameplay, so that you have just one thing that is the experience. But that's going to take, I think, quite a bit of time, and people are going to have to get trained out of the old ways, because traditionally, as they started introducing narrative into games, it was structured very much so. You'd get a mission briefing, or you'd get a very quick cutscene, and then you'd have a bunch of open gameplay, and then once that was done, sort of your reward for finishing a level would be, you know, more narrative, and so it was drip-fed to you, and then interspersed with actual gameplay, and so the more we can start to blur those lines, I think the better. And then in terms of the production process, I'll try and be as short as possible. We start with what we call conception, which is where a group of people, could be as few as 4, it could be as many as 15. Generally, these are the leads of a department, sit down and decide, okay, we're going to make a game. This is what it's going to be about. Here's the sort of, here are the pillars of the gameplay that we're going to try and focus on in developing the game. Here's our high-level idea for the narrative wrapper. You know, and that can take anywhere from, I don't know, 1 to 6 to 9 months, and sometimes you'll start to see them building prototypes. So here is sort of a 10-minute, very rough, not very pretty, but gives you an idea of how the game is going to play, what it's going to feel like, sometimes what it's going to look like if the art director has put together, you know, a bunch of concept artwork for it. Then you move into pre-production, which is where a lot of the actual writing begins, at least. So the world building starts, assets are created, gameplay is prototyped, and systems are developed and built by the programmers and the engineers, and the groundwork is laid. The game, a lot of times what we do is we build the game on paper first. We go to what we call a blueprinting session, and we spend about 4 weeks in a room, a little bit smaller than this, building the game on the wall. It's all flashcards that say, here's what happens during the first hour, the second hour, the third hour, the fourth hour. And then that is sort of put into a document, and it's distributed, and people start to build according to basically the blueprint, and that's when production starts. And production is when you're actually building the entire game from pretty much start to finish, and putting in all of the elements and building out the game world in 3D so that you can actually start moving through it from beginning to end. Around that time, we're then doing voice recording, motion capture where we're filming the actors, and then all of that data is taken and put into the game. And then we have an integration period where all of that stuff that we've captured during voice recording is put in, where playtest results for mission difficulty and balancing is being addressed. And then there's a final phase where we polish, and hopefully at that point the game is finished and we're just going through nitpicking stuff and tweaking things and fixing bugs, and then you ship it.
Wow, fascinating. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for coming by.
Sure.
My name is Eduardo. I'm an MFA screenwriting student. I'm a gamer too. And I had actually two questions. Let me start with the first one. When you look at Assassin's Creed, one of the fascinating things is it's not only a historical game, but there's like a sci-fi component to it, right? How did that come about? Because this could have been pretty easily just a historical game, but the other layer is amazing.
The origins of that were strange. So when we first started working on the game, we wanted to find a way to justify a lot of the video gamey elements, right? We wanted to have an actual narrative explanation for the HUD, for the inventory, for basically all the things that you traditionally associate with playing games. And the creative director at the time, Patrice Desilets, had come off of the Sands of Time game, which had done that to a certain degree for some video game-isms, right? So the Sands of Time was framed as a story that was being told. So whenever you died, you would hear something along the lines of, wait, that's not how it happened. And then you would sort of restart back to the last checkpoint. So it had the beginnings of a narrative frame to explain away some of the contrivances of video games. And so that was one of the reasons that we did it. And once we started discussing that, we realized there was no easy way to do that in a period setting, right? I don't know how you explain the idea of checkpoints and restarting and having all of these video game elements if it's all period. So we also at the same time we're getting some feedback internally about how people were nervous about us doing something that was a straight period piece, and was this going to resonate with people, and how do we make it relevant to people in the present? How do we connect the stuff that we're doing by rebuilding the past with people today? And so those were sort of the seeds that were planted that eventually morphed into what would become the wrapper of the game. So that's the sort of short answer, I guess.
And then, have you been involved in the development of AC4 at all? Like
for Black Flag?
Yeah.
So only in the sense that I have been working with the writer. I review the scripts that he's writing and offer feedback. But again, none of it's mandated. It's up to him to decide what he wants to do with it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, kind of a two-part question. I was just wondering, mostly your opinion, if any, on modern indie gaming and their narrative structure and storytelling, as far as games like Sword and Sorcery or Ridiculous Fishing, the way they kind of give you their backstory or put the character or you as a player along through their story in interesting and not very typical ways, like using Twitter or alternate reality games as far as narrative.
I don't think that there's any right way or wrong way to do narrative in games. I get very angry actually when I see people say, this is the only way to do it. I think there's as many ways to do it as there are games out there, and I love indie games. One of my good friends is a guy named Nathan Vella who works at Cappy, and we like to highlight the fact that like I can be working at like the big AAA studio and he can be out there at Cappy. He put out Sword and Sorcery, and we vacation together. So obviously I love indie games and I love the people that work on them, and I play them, and I have Ridiculous Fishing on my iPad actually. So, and I think they're great. I think it's fantastic. I think it gives you room to tell more personal stories, right? To not have the big machine of the big studio or some asshole like me, giving you constant feedback. It's a little bit raw and more natural, and I think it's fantastic. And so, I don't, like I said, I don't think there's any one way to tell a story in games. I think that whatever works for the creator and then whatever works for the consumer, then that's great. We should, and the more variety that's out there, the better.
Cool, and kind of almost going alongside that, are there any major differences between something that you would write as like a AAA title and localizing something that's also heavily narrative based, like Fire Emblem that was just released that has a lot of narrative that goes along into it? Is that are there any huge differences between that as far as like customs or cultural differences
I mean,
that you've seen?
Not that I've seen. I think that in the case of comparing something like Fire Emblem to Assassin's Creed, it's just that the method of delivery of narrative is very different in them, right? Because in Fire Emblem, it's primarily delivered through static cutscenes and a lot of text. But I assume that they wrestle with some of the same things, but they don't have to worry as much, for example, about whether or not they're getting the performance capture done right on the stage, and whether the actors are hitting their marks, or whether stuff like that. They can focus on purely on the text, on the content, which is probably actually really nice, because it means that they can put 100% of their energy towards just telling the story and not having to worry as much about the execution on screen of the story.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Hello, my name's Andrew. In the first Assassin's Creed, you play a character that he almost treats what he does as kind of a job. But in the second one, you have a character, he's a lot more charismatic, a lot more courageous. It's a different kind of character. And in the third one, you play as a character who's really family oriented, has a sense of honor. I was wondering how kind of which way does it go? Does the character kind of influence what kind of place you want to, what era you want to set the game in, or does the setting change the character?
I think a lot of times we've been influenced by the setting. So it's been two things. Initially, it was the setting that started to influence the character, at least for the first two, and plus what we wanted to do, right? So in the first game, we wanted to tell the story of someone that had already been doing this, that was a professional, that had grown up inside the Order, that we were sort of coming in the middle of his life. The second game was more along the lines of superhero origin story, right? So we wanted to start from the beginning and show how he joined up and became one. And then by the time we hit the third one, it was a question of both the setting and the circumstances and the perspective, and then also this desire not to repeat the kinds of archetypes that we'd already explored. It was really important to try and do something new. And so there are lots of, I guess, different factors that go into it. We don't start with any one thing, right? Like during conception, there's just a lot of conversations that are going on, and things just sort of evolve over time. There isn't a formula or a specific way that we go about it. It's oftentimes just the result of a lot of discussion, and sometimes several weeks, if not several months, of sort of back and forth and brainstorming and different ways in, and sometimes different ideas and issues will come up that will cause us to change things completely. I mean, the idea of having your father as a playable character in AC3 was something that we did not hit on until a couple of weeks or months into conception. It wasn't something that we were sure that we were going to do from day one. It sort of grew out of our conversations and the conception work that we were doing.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
So a lot of what we do, and obviously, and you have your feet in film and television too, a lot of what we do there is think about who's going to see this. Like, and a lot of what we complain about with Hollywood is pandering to a certain,
Yep.
We know that they'll watch this, and then that's all that gets made. To what degree, in that conception phase, do you think about who wants what in a video game, and how much of it do they want?
We think about what the fans want, and that's about it, at least on my end.
What about a new game, like something that doesn't have the legacy of Assassins that's related to Prince of Persia?
Ideally, you think about what you as a player would want. You try not. I think that if you approach game development in a cynical manner or in a manipulative manner, it's going to show in the final product. Like I'm a big believer in this very weird hippy-dippy idea that your attitude during conception and production somehow leaks into the game, and you can tell if something has been cynically produced and made. There's a game that Ubisoft is putting out in a few weeks called Blood Dragon that was done by a friend of mine that is completely insane. It's total 80s homage and utterly over the top, and he had the time of his life doing it. And as I've watched all of the marketing and promotional stuff being shown to people, you see the same sort of glee in the audience. And so it's again one of those things where his enthusiasm and his passion like literally leaked into the final product, and it's coming through the screen to infect people.
That's great.
And I think you started to see it with a lot of the less well-received military shooters, that it starts to feel a little bit Me Too, and I think that that's been a challenge for companies that are trying to go up against things like Call of Duty or Battlefield, is that, sometimes I think you can feel like this was a calculated or manipulative attempt to jump into a market, and sometimes they'll say that, like they'll literally say, we want a piece of that pie, and those are words that should make you very nervous when the people are saying, as part of their sales pitch, we want to steal market share. How about we want to make a really cool game, or we want to create a really interesting experience? If you're not hearing those things, like run away, run away.
So, we still, the guys before you, are doing Gods of War to film. How do you feel about movies or games to movie adaptations, given that there's 20 hours, 40 hours per game?
I think it depends. I think that there are lots and lots of games out there that people play for the narrative and appreciate for the narrative or for the characters or for the experiences, and I think those are fine. I thought that when something like Doom got made, that seemed very strange because that was a game that was not necessarily celebrated for its story or even the world it had created, and then to do the double whammy of not even respecting what small amount of narrative there was, that just seemed like a very strange decision to me. So I'm all for it, provided it makes sense. I also think that ideally, if you move into another space, be it film or television, and you even see it now with novelizations, is that you don't retell the story of the game. Right. You set a story in the universe that's been created by the game. Then I think that you're setting yourself up for success. I don't know if we're at a place yet where people in the studio system are as familiar or passionate or respectful of games as they should be in order to get there. I at least can take some comfort in knowing that the guys that are adapting God of War do like it and do play games, and so that makes me really happy. The question then becomes, how about the studio execs that are in charge? We'll see, but at least you're starting to see people take things in the right direction. When you hear them talk about what they're doing for that game, they get it, right? They understand that the game was about the spectacle and the setting and all of that stuff, and so they're playing to the right aspects, I suppose.
Would television be a better medium for adapting a game?
I don't know. It's possible. I've seen a lot of people talking about, since Defiance has recently come out, that you see a lot of people talking about how they wish that someone was doing a Fallout TV series, and that would be kind of interesting. I think something like that, where you have such a large universe with so many years of content created for it, that there might be room for a TV series. It's always going to depend. It depends on if you have the right material and the right take. So I don't want to say yes or no to anything. It's always going to be on case-by-case basis. I do, though, to this day, think that Doom and it was a very strange approach, and I think that what they did with the Super Mario Brothers movie was an even stranger approach. Like those just feel like things where someone said, "Look at those sales figures," not, "Oh my God, this really touched me, and they created this incredible world, and we really need to share it with people." So that's when I get sad again. Like when it doesn't feel like it's coming from a good place, from a passionate place, that's when I would be concerned.
Well, like through machinima, I mean, there's ancillary content now, like you said, novelizations, also surrounding the way that Star Wars has had books forever, and Star Trek has had books forever. You can read Halo books. Of course, Microsoft did the Halo web series to lead into the launch of Halo 4. Is that something that's attractive to you and interesting to you? Something you'd want to be involved with for the game?
I mean, I think that stuff is nice and interesting. Again, I wish that we didn't look at those things as marketing assets. Like, I wish that they would be standalone things, but, I'm maybe being idealistic, right? These people have businesses to run, and they try and find a middle ground by saying we're creating narrative content that's separate and distinct and functions as a prologue, but at the same time, in the back of my mind, the idea, right, the goal at the end of the day is to help push product, and I want us to reach a place where the goal at the end of the day is to expand a universe or tell stories set within it. And so I think that these things are interesting and exciting, but I want to make sure that when they are created, that they're the type of things that can stand alone, so that someone that's never played a Halo game can come into this and watch it and appreciate it for what it is, and maybe never touch a game but still be hooked on the universe. And I think that we're getting closer and closer, and kudos to Microsoft for being willing to make those investments. And so it's nice to see that there is work being done in that space. So I am excited, and so provided these are ways to grow the universe and tell stories that we may not be able to tell within the game, then that's a great opportunity.
All right, well, I promised you I was going to wrap up with asking you about some favorites. So before we close, so your favorite arcade game as a kid?
So it was a toss-up, I think, between Dragon Slayer and Space Ace. Like, I love Don Bluth, and so Dragon Slayer, just the visuals were amazing, and the idea of trying to push forward to the end of it. So I really enjoyed that, and did a lot of my quarters. Yeah, a lot of them.
Okay, your favorite Atari game?
Toss-up between Haunted House and Adventure.
Okay. And television? I know you played
Snafu.
Snafu. And Coleco, which was mentioned just a little while ago.
Coleco was probably Ladybug, because I actually got my mom to play that with me. It was basically a Pac-Man knockoff, but like I have memories of my mother playing it with me, so
Nintendo.
Metroid.
Okay, and should we differentiate Super Nintendo?
Super Nintendo was probably Final Fantasy 6.
Final Fantasy
6.
I love Metroid.
Or
Computer game.
ActRaiser, so it's hard. So computer game is really hard. I can't give you one. I can give you a couple. There's Dungeon Master. There's Ultima 7. There's Pool of Radiance, and really all the gold box games that SSI did. World of Zine, and I should stop because I can just go on forever and ever and ever. I don't have a single favorite one. I have too many.
And then, real quick, what are you playing now that isn't a game you're developing? What are you into right now?
I'm playing a lot of stuff right now. I still play way too much League of Legends. I just finished Bioshock Infinite. I need to play Tomb Raider. It's like sitting on my table at home. I just haven't had time. I keep going back. There's a game called Terraria that was on the PC that they just put out on the Xbox, and for whatever reason I decided to like give it a shot, and I've already sunk like 30 hours into it. I need to not do that because I have this growing backlog. I need to play Dead Space 3. I need to play Tomb Raider. So yeah, I gotta get through my backlog. I gotta stop playing stuff that I've already played. It's a problem. And then I have things on my iPad. I'm playing Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon on my 3DS, and PSP. I need to get what's it called, Guacamole, which is sort of like Super Metroid, but for the PSP. But see, there's too many games. It's really bad, really bad.
But it's your it's your profession.
I know, but I want to be able to actually enjoy them,
Yeah.
and sometimes I feel compelled to start tearing through them, and that makes me really nervous. Like I took my time with Bioshock Infinite. I probably could have finished it like in half the time, but I had to see and do everything and poke through every nook and cranny and collect every Vox phone, and I can't help myself. Like I get very OCD inside games, and sometimes if there's too much to do, I'll get overwhelmed and just stop playing.
Okay.
So I need to learn how to just enjoy and play games rather than.
Which is what you're
consume them
trying to give
100%.
to everyone. That
I
you're-
know.
Well, thanks for being here, Corey.
Thank you for having me.
Tremendous honor to have you guys.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all for being here. Hope to see you again sometime.
For sure.